In 1923, a single loaf of bread in Berlin cost 200 billion marks. Workers carried wages in wheelbarrows. The German economy had collapsed to dust. Stores sat empty. Factories shut their gates. Children in Berlin watched their parents trade furniture just to eat a single meal each day. But here is what history books often skip. Germany did not wait to be rescued. It rebuilt a working economy almost entirely without real money. Welcome to the Market Antiquarian, where history and finance reveal how the world really works. Subscribe to stay informed. To understand how Germany rebuilt, you must first understand what destroyed it. The story begins not in Berlin but in the trenches of World War I. In 1914, Germany entered the war with one of the strongest industrial economies in Europe. Its factories hummed and its banks held solid reserves. By 1918, the war had consumed everything. Soldiers returned to a country that had borrowed and printed its way through 4 years of brutal conflict. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 handed Germany a bill historians still describe as one of the harshest financial penalties in modern history. Germany was ordered to pay 132 billion gold marks in reparations to the Allied nations. That figure represented decades of national economic output. German factories began producing goods not for their own people, but to send abroad as payment. The domestic economy hollowed out from the inside. The government could not raise enough tax revenue to pay its war debts, so it began printing paper marks in ever larger quantities every month. At first, the inflation was slow. Then it accelerated. By 1921, prices were rising faster than workers could spend their wages on household basics. By 1922, inflation had become a force that swallowed savings overnight. A German family that saved for 20 years watched its money vanish in weeks. In November 1923, German hyperinflation reached its peak. One United States dollar was worth 4.2 trillion German paper marks on the open exchange. Restaurants in Berlin changed their menu prices between the first and second course of the same meal. The currency was losing value by the hour. Banks stopped lending. Businesses stopped investing. Farmers refused to bring food into cities because paper marks were worth less than the food itself. The barter system returned to German streets. A pair of shoes traded for 3 chickens. A coat bought a week of heating fuel in winter. Germany had become a country where the official currency was trusted by almost no one, and yet recovery was about to begin in an unusual way. The man who designed Germany recovery was not a politician. He was a banker named Jalmar Schacht, who arrived in November 1923 with a bold plan. Schacht walked into a government office in Berlin and proposed something almost impossible. He would create a brand new currency backed by land. The new currency was called the Rentenmark. It was not backed by gold. It was backed by the value of German agricultural land and real estate. On November 15th, in the year 1923, the Rentenmark launched at a rate of 1 Rentenmark to 1 trillion old paper marks still in circulation. The government issued a strictly limited supply of Rentenmarks. Only 3.2 billion entered circulation, designed specifically to prevent runaway inflation. Suddenly, German citizens had a currency that felt solid. Farmers brought food back to Berlin markets. Shops reopened their doors across German cities. The psychological shift was enormous. People trusted the Rentenmark simply because the government promised it would never print unlimited quantities of it. Historians still debate whether the Rentenmark was truly backed by anything real. The land it referenced could not be converted into cash by holders. But the legal backing did not matter. What mattered was that people believed in it. Belief was the real foundation of the new German economy. Within weeks of the Rentenmark launch, hyperinflation stopped almost completely. Prices stabilized across German cities. Workers accepted wages once again. This was one of the fastest inflation stabilizations in recorded history. It happened not through gold or foreign aid, but through collective trust alone. But stabilizing the currency was only step one. Germany still owed enormous reparations to the Allied nations and had no real way to pay them. Enter the Dawes Plan of 1924. This international agreement restructured German reparations, payments, and opened the door to direct foreign investment. Under the Dawes Plan, American banks began lending money directly to Germany. Foreign capital flowed into German industry and rebuilt its factory floors. American investment bank J.P. Morgan & Company helped coordinate loans that sent hundreds of millions of dollars into the German industrial sector. German steel mills in the Ruhr Valley roared back to life. Coal mines reopened. Railroad lines were rebuilt across the German countryside once again. Between 1924 and 1929, Germany received nearly 25 billion Reichsmarks in foreign loans, mostly from American banks and private United States investors. This money modernized German industry. New machinery arrived from abroad. New factories were constructed on the outskirts of major German cities. The period became known as the Golden Twenties in Germany. Berlin transformed into one of the most culturally vibrant cities anywhere in the world. Cabarets filled with crowds on the streets of Berlin. Department stores on the Kurfürstendamm Boulevard displayed goods impossible to find years before. German companies like Siemens and Bayer and BASF expanded rapidly, exporting electrical equipment and chemicals to markets across multiple continents. Unemployment fell sharply. Industrial output rose. The Weimar Republic appeared to be succeeding, where many had predicted it would permanently collapse. But underneath this prosperity lay a dangerous fragility. Germany's recovery was built on borrowed money, and borrowed money always eventually comes due. When the Wall Street crash struck in October 1929, American banks began calling in their loans. The flow of foreign capital into Germany reversed instantly. German factories running on American credit suddenly faced funding gaps. Orders dried up. Workers were let go by the thousands across major German cities. Unemployment in Germany climbed from under 1 million in 1928 to over 6 million by 1932. Streets of Berlin and Hamburg filled with men without work. Soup kitchens opened across German cities. Long lines of unemployed men stood outside relief offices in Hamburg and Munich and Cologne every morning. The second great German economic crisis had arrived, and once again Germany would attempt something unusual to fight its way back towards stability. By 1933, a new government had come to power. Whatever the politics of that era, the economic tools it deployed are studied by economists to this day. The new government launched a massive program of public works spending. Construction teams moved across Germany, building roads, bridges, and public buildings. The Autobahn highway network became one of the most visible symbols of this construction push. Thousands of workers were employed laying roads across Germany, but Germany did not have enough treasury money to pay for all this construction. So it invented a financial instrument called the Mefo bill. The Mefo bill was a form of government promissory note. The government created a shell company called Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft in Berlin. This company had no real operations. It existed on paper only, but it issued bills that German industrial contractors accepted as legitimate payment. Contractors who received Mefo bills could hold them for up to 5 years or redeem them at the Reichsbank in Berlin for cash. Between 1933 and 1938, Germany issued approximately 12 billion Reichsmarks worth of Mefo bills, creating money entirely outside the official banking system. The genius of the Mefo bill was that it did not appear on the official government balance sheet. It allowed huge spending without visible public borrowing. Foreign creditors could not easily see how much Germany was truly spending. The real national debt was hidden inside paper instruments issued secretly. German unemployment fell from over 6 million in 1932 to under 1 million by 1938. The economic recovery appeared on paper to be a modern miracle. Factories across the Ruhr Valley returned to full capacity. Steel output doubled. Chemical production expanded. Electrical manufacturing grew at rapid pace. Workers in German industrial cities like Essen and Dortmund returned to their jobs. Wages rose. Consumer spending in German markets began to recover. The government also invested in agricultural programs, helping rural German communities that had suffered through years of deep economic depression. New housing blocks were constructed in German cities. Urban infrastructure projects employed tens of thousands of construction workers who had been idle. Germany began negotiating bilateral trade agreements with countries in Eastern Europe, South America, and parts of Southeast Asia all at once. These were barter arrangements at the national level. Germany would send machinery and manufactured goods. Partners would send back raw materials. Romania sent oil to Germany in exchange for industrial equipment. Brazil sent coffee and rubber for German optical and chemical products. Yugoslavia sent agricultural products in exchange for German factory machines. Hungary sent wheat for German electrical and manufacturing exports. Germany was recreating the barter economy that citizens had used during hyperinflation, but now operating it at the level of national diplomacy. This trade network allowed Germany to acquire raw materials for industrial production without spending hard foreign currency it did not possess. The Reichsmark was not freely convertible on international markets. Germany controlled its exchange rates tightly through the Reichsbank offices in Berlin. Foreign companies doing business in Germany were often paid in blocked marks that could only be spent inside Germany on German-made goods. This system trapped foreign investment inside the German economy, preventing capital flight and ensuring money earned in Germany stayed in Germany. Economists studying this period have called it managed autarky, meaning an economy designed to become as self-sufficient as humanly possible. Germany invested in synthetic fuel research at industrial facilities in Luna, attempting to reduce national dependence on imported petroleum. Chemists at BASF and other German companies developed synthetic rubber, synthetic fuel, and synthetic fibers to replace materials Germany could not grow. These investments in synthetic alternatives were not just economic choices, they were attempts to build an economy that could operate without global trade. By 1938, Germany had one of the fastest-growing industrial economies in Europe by official statistics. But the Mefo bills were now coming due. Hjalmar Schacht, who designed both the Rentenmark and later served as Reichsbank president, warned the economy was heading toward a new crisis. Schacht told government officials in Berlin that the Mefo bill system could not continue indefinitely without triggering a dangerous new wave of inflation. He was removed from his position inside the Reichsbank building in Berlin. The warnings were ignored. The hidden national debt continued to grow. The economic model that rebuilt Germany between 1933 and 1938 was not sustainable. It created employment and production, but rested entirely on deferred debt. Germany had rebuilt its economy twice in 15 years through unconventional means, first with a land-backed currency. Then, with hidden promissory notes, neither solution was permanent. Both bought time, and what Germany did with that borrowed time became one of the defining stories of the 20th century. The lessons from this period fascinated economists for generations. How does a collapsed economy rebuild trust? How does paper become valuable after ruin? Central banks around the world still study the Rentenmark stabilization as one of the most dramatic examples of inflation control in financial history. The Mefo bill system is studied in business schools as an example of off-balance sheet financing, a technique that resurfaced in corporate scandals later. Germany in the 1920s and 1930s proved that economies can rebuild on instruments not backed by gold or silver, but backed entirely by human belief. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth of all. Every dollar and euro and yen in circulation today rests on exactly that same fragile foundation. Paper is paper. Value is a shared agreement between strangers. The history of Germany shows how fast that agreement can collapse and how it rebuilds. What Germany did with paper and promises changed how economists think about the true nature of money and how it functions inside human societies. The Reichsbank building in Berlin had stood as a symbol of financial authority. Now it housed secrets the world would only fully understand much later. In the next section, we follow Germany through the rubble of 1945 and the currency reform of 1948 that reset everything. In a single dramatic weekend, by spring of 1945, Germany lay in ruins. Cities like Dresden and Hamburg were mountains of rubble. Factories stood silent across the land. Berlin was a field of broken stone and ash. The Brandenburg Gate stood cracked and blackened against a sky thick with smoke. The war had destroyed approximately 20% of all housing in Germany. Millions of people lived in basements and makeshift shelters in rubble. Industrial production had fallen to roughly 30% of pre-war levels. Railway lines were cut, bridges were destroyed, roads were blocked with debris. The Reichsmark was still technically in circulation, but almost no one trusted it. It had become nearly worthless in daily German life. A strange underground economy had taken over German streets. Cigarettes became the most reliable trading currency in Germany after the war ended. American cigarettes were traded for food, clothing, and medicine across German cities. A single pack of cigarettes could buy a week of groceries. German workers sometimes refused payment in Reichsmarks altogether. They asked instead for cigarettes or canned goods from Allied military supply stores. The Allies divided Germany into 4 occupation zones. American, British, French, and Soviet military governments each controlled separate parts of the country. The economic situation in all 4 zones was severe. Inflation was creeping back. Food was rationed. Industrial output remained dangerously low through 1947. The black market had become the real economy of Germany. Illegal trading networks spread across the ruins of Frankfurt, Munich, and Cologne. In Frankfurt, open-air black markets operated near the train station every day. Soldiers, civilians, and merchants exchanged goods outside all official channels. Allied military governments printed occupation Reichsmarks to pay their soldiers. This added more worthless paper into an economy already drowning in it. By 1947, economists inside the United States government had concluded that Germany could not recover without a total and complete currency replacement. The plan they designed was radical. On a single weekend in June 1948, they would abolish the Reichsmark and replace it with a new currency. The new currency was called the Deutsche Mark. Every German citizen would receive 40 Deutsche Marks in exchange for their old Reichsmarks. On day one, old Reichsmark savings in banks were converted at 100 old marks to 6.5 new Deutsche Marks. Savings were wiped down to almost nothing in a weekend. The currency reform of June 20th in the year 1948 is one of the most dramatic economic events in all of modern German financial history. On the morning of June 21st, in 1948, West Germans woke to shop windows stocked overnight with goods that merchants had been hiding for months. Shopkeepers across Frankfurt and Hamburg and Munich had hoarded goods for weeks, waiting for the moment when a real trusted currency returned to Germany. The moment the Deutschmark appeared, those hidden goods flooded back onto shelves. Bread, shoes, tools, fabric, and soap appeared in store windows overnight. West Germans lined up on Frankfurt streets with their new Deutschmark notes in hand, buying goods they had not seen available for years. The psychological impact was immediate. The currency reform did not just change money, it changed the feeling of everyday life across all of Germany. The man most responsible for what happened next was an economist named Ludwig Erhard. He stood before cameras in Frankfurt and made an announcement. Erhard announced that alongside the new currency, he was abolishing most of the price controls and rationing systems that had governed German economic life. His advisors warned him the timing was reckless. Erhard told them he had not changed the rules. He had simply abolished all of them. American occupation authorities were stunned. General Lucius Clay in Frankfurt called Erhard and said his advisors considered it a serious economic mistake. Erhard reportedly told General Clay that his advisors agreed with him completely. Only the occupation officials believed it was a mistake. Within weeks of the Deutschmark launch, West German prices began stabilizing. Factories started rehiring workers who had been idle since 1945. The combination of a clean currency and free market pricing created an economic energy that economists across the world had not expected so quickly. Industrial output in West Germany began rising at a pace that surprised even the most optimistic planners inside the United States government. The Marshall Plan also played a critical role. Starting in 1948, the United States sent approximately $1.4 billion in direct aid to West Germany. Marshall Plan funds arrived at the port of Hamburg on ships carrying machinery, raw materials, and support that West German factories urgently needed. Unlike the Dawes Plan loans of the 1920s, the Marshall Plan funds were largely grants. West Germany did not need to repay most of this aid. This distinction was crucial. Germany recovery in the 1920s had collapsed on borrowed money. The Marshall Plan built on a far more stable foundation. West German steel production doubled between 1948 and 1950. Coal output from the Ruhr Valley climbed steadily. Electrical manufacturing expanded nationwide. By 1950, West German industrial production had already surpassed pre-war levels. The country that had been rubble 5 years earlier was building again. The period from roughly 1950 to 1963 became known worldwide as the Wirtschaftswunder, which translates from German directly as the economic miracle. West German gross domestic product grew at an average rate of approximately 8% per year throughout the entire decade of the 1950s. Volkswagen cars rolled off assembly lines in Wolfsburg and began appearing on roads across West Germany and then across all of Europe and beyond. The Volkswagen Beetle became a global symbol of West German industrial recovery. Factories in Wolfsburg employed tens of thousands of workers by the mid-1950s. Companies like Bayer and BASF and Hoechst rebuilt their chemical plants and resumed exporting pharmaceuticals and industrial chemicals to global markets once more. Siemens rebuilt its electrical manufacturing operations in Munich and Berlin. Its products appeared in homes and factories across Europe within just a few years. West German unemployment fell from approximately 10% in 1952, under 1% by 1961. The labor shortage became so severe that foreign workers were invited. Germany began recruiting workers from Italy, then Spain, then Turkey to fill factory and construction jobs that West Germans could no longer fill alone. Turkish guest workers arrived at Munich and Frankfurt train stations carrying suitcases, recruited directly by German industrial companies desperate for labor. The transformation from rubble to industrial powerhouse had taken less than 15 years. Economists everywhere began calling it a genuine economic miracle. But was it truly a miracle? Or was it the result of deliberate policy choices made by German and Allied officials in the late 1940s? Ludwig Erhard believed economic freedom was the engine of recovery. Removing government controls released energy that centralized planning could never create. Erhard stood before the West German parliament in Bonn and argued that price controls killed initiative. Free prices were the signal system of all prosperity. His policies became known as the social market economy, combining free market competition with a social safety net designed to protect vulnerable workers. The social market economy was not pure capitalism and not socialism. It was a deliberate middle path designed for the specific conditions of post-war Germany. Workers in West Germany gained strong legal protections and union rights. At the same time, businesses competed freely in open markets, without heavy government direction. This balance between competition and protection gave West German workers confidence to spend, which gave businesses confidence they needed to invest and grow. The Deutsche Mark itself became a symbol of stability. West Germans trusted it because they had lived through the horror of the Reichsmark collapse firsthand. The German public had been burned twice by currency destruction in 30 years. That memory made them deeply committed to price stability and sound money policy. The Bundesbank, which became West Germany's central bank, developed a global reputation as one of the most inflation-resistant financial institutions in existence. The Bundesbank building in Frankfurt became a symbol of monetary discipline. Its policies kept West German inflation among the lowest of any major economy for decades. This commitment to price stability was not just a technical preference. It was rooted in the lived memory of grandparents who had carried wheelbarrows of worthless marks. When historians ask why West Germany took inflation so seriously, the answer is always the same. The memory of 1923 was written deep into German economic culture. East Germany followed a completely different path under Soviet control. Its economy was centrally planned from offices in East Berlin with no free market pricing. East German factories were nationalized and directed by government planners in East Berlin. Output targets were set by officials rather than by consumer demand. By the 1960s, the gap between West and East German living standards had become visible and dramatic to anyone crossing the border between the two states. West Berlin shop windows were full of consumer goods. East Berlin shop windows were often empty or stocked with limited goods that citizens could not refuse. The contrast between the two German economies became one of the most powerful real-world economic experiments in history, visible from a single divided city. When the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, East Germans poured across the border and spent their East German marks in West German supermarkets immediately. Crowds of East Germans pushed shopping carts through West Berlin supermarkets, filling them with bananas and coffee and goods they had never freely been able to buy. The currency union of East and West Germany followed in July 1990. East German marks were converted to Deutsche Marks at a rate seen as politically generous. West German taxpayers transferred enormous sums eastward to rebuild East German infrastructure. Roads were repaired, phone lines replaced, factories were modernized. The reunification of Germany cost an estimated 1.5 trillion euros over 2 decades. It was the most expensive peacetime reconstruction project in modern history. Germany absorbed this cost while remaining one of the strongest economies in Europe. The foundation, built in 1948, was strong enough to carry the burden. Today, Germany is the largest economy in Europe and the third largest in the entire world by total annual economic output and export volume combined. German exports of cars, machinery, chemicals, and precision instruments reach every corner of the global economy, from South America to Southeast Asia to Africa. Companies like Volkswagen, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, BASF, and Siemens employ millions of people inside Germany and operate factories on every inhabited continent. All of this traces back to decisions made in the ruins of 1945 and the currency reform. Weekend of June 1948, in the American occupation zone, it traces back to the Rentenmark that stopped hyperinflation in 1923, not through gold, but through the careful management of human belief alone. It traces back to Joel Merschacht, standing in a Berlin office in 1923, proposing that agricultural land could back a currency the way gold once had. It traces back to Ludwig Erhard standing before cameras in Frankfurt in 1948 and abolishing price controls that almost every expert had told him to keep. Each of those moments was a bet on something unguaranteed. Each was a bet that people would choose to believe in a new financial beginning. Each time the bet worked, not because the economics were perfect, but because the human desire to trade and build and improve is powerful and enduring. The history of Germany between 1923 and 1960 is the history of money stripped to its most basic truth. Money is not gold. Money is not silver. Money is the shared agreement of millions of people that a piece of paper represents real value in the real world of goods and daily exchange. When that agreement breaks, as it did in Berlin in 1923, the results are catastrophic. When it is rebuilt carefully, as in 1948, the results can be remarkable. The same lesson applies every time a currency collapses anywhere in the world. The economics are secondary. The psychology of trust is always the primary variable. Germany proved this twice in the same century. A nation can rebuild from almost nothing if it can persuade its people to believe in a new beginning. The Rentenmark was backed by land that could not be touched. The Deutsche Mark was backed by discipline that had to be earned back over many years. Neither was backed by gold in a vault. Both were backed by something more powerful than gold and more fragile than gold. They were backed by human agreement. Every economy in the world today operates on exactly the same principle. The money in your bank account exists because enough people agree that it represents something real. Germany learned that truth the hardest possible way. Twice in 30 years, in the ruins of two different currencies collapsed by two different forms of human error, the past still has stories to tell. Subscribe and let us uncover them together.